Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. We're going to talk a little bit about a man named John Brockman today. And John Brockman is a literary agent who works with all of the scientists who write books and all of the academics who write books and all of the supposed great minds. Well, John Brockman was one of Jeffrey Epstein's enablers, a man who brought Jeffrey Epstein closer to these scientists. And the article we're going to read today from the New Republic is going to detail just how that occurred. Now, this article came out on August 22nd of 2019, and the article was written by Evgeny Morozov. And the headline, Jeffrey Epstein's Intellectual Enabler. How did Epstein meet so many luminaries in the world of science and technology? It all might trace back to literary agent John Brockman. And I've heard John Brockman's name brought up several times to me in private conversations with people who are close to this case. And I've been meaning to get around to talk about John Brockman, and since the news is so light lately, I figured today would be the perfect time to do that. So let's jump into this article and see just exactly what John Brockman was up to. If you are an accomplished science or technology writer, your books are probably handled by the most powerful literary agency in the field, the famous John Brockman Incorporated, started by John Brockman and now run by Max Brockman, his son. As it happens, Max is also my agent and has been since my first book was sold in 2009. As agencies go, I only have positive things to report. The Brockmans fight for their authors and get us very handsome advances. That's what agents are for. Of course, right? Look, not knocking the guy for his hustle. We all have to have our hustle and we all have to be good at our job, right? And if you're a literary agent, your job is to make sure that your writers are getting deals and they're writing books. So, not knocking the man for his hustle. I have no problem with the fact that he's a literary agent, right? My problem is he enabled Jeffrey Epstein. My problem is he brought Jeffrey Epstein into a circle and gave him credibility off of his own name, off of the back of his own name. And when you do that, you're vouching for this guy. And in the world I come from, well, if you vouch for somebody, you're responsible for their behavior. But that's not the whole story. John is also the president, founder, and chief impresario of the Edge Foundation, which has earned a stellar reputation as an eclectic platform for conversations that involve scientists, artists, and technologists. There is more than one Edge Foundation, though. There is the one meant for public consumption with its annual question, e.g., what are you optimistic about? Answered by famous intellectuals and thinkers, and one meant for private consumption by members of Brockman's elite network. The former exists primarily online. The latter has a vibrant real-life component with sumptuous dinners, exclusive conferences, and quite a bit of travel on private jets. It functions as an elaborate massage of the ego, and apparently much else, for the rich, the smart, and the powerful. Again, we see this time and time again with business leaders and politicians and, hedge fund managers, etc., etc. But now we also see that the highest in the realms of academia, the scientists, the doctors, the professors, all of these people are just as susceptible to guys like Jeffrey Epstein as well, and if not more. You see, these guys might be the leading minds at what they do, but that's about it, right? If you take a look at most of these scientists, they're not exactly what you would call, guys that are going to knock your girl's socks off if they come and sit down and look at them, right? These are the kind of guys that are super intelligent, but pretty goofy for the most part, right? These guys weren't playing on the football team. They weren't shotgunning beers on Saturday nights. They weren't getting into fights. They weren't getting the hot cheerleader girls in school. None of that. So that was all repressed for them. Now later on in life, well, the world's their oyster, and Jeffrey Epstein just happens to be serving seafood. Over the course of my research into the history of digital culture, I've got to know quite a lot about John's role in shaping the digital and especially the intellectual world that we live in. I've examined and scanned many of his letters in the archives of famous men, and they are mostly men, such as Marshall McLuhan, Stuart Brand, and Gregory Bateson. He is no mere literary agent. He is a true organic intellectual of the digital revolution, shaping trends rather than responding to them. Would the MIT Media Lab, TED conferences, and Wired have the clout and intellectual orientation that they have now without the extensive network cultivated by Brockman over decades? I, for one, very much doubt it. Again, I've talked about these TED Talks and these Media Lab conferences and the Edge Foundation for years. And a lot of times it fell upon deaf ears. You know, I would speak to people about it and their eyes would glaze over. There's always been something going on, something wrong with these scientists, these people that were hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. We never had anybody come out really and talk about it besides, when Virginia so bravely stepped forward and talked about, Minsky and some of the other scientists and stuff. But these guys have been able to go underneath the radar, operate under the radar for so long because everyone looks up to them because they're so smart and they're so respected. But meanwhile, in the dark of night and on the privacy of Jeffrey Epstein's island, well, their real character started to show through. So I've always been skeptical of these conferences like TED Talk and the Edge Foundation, any of these places where people get up on a stage and they start preaching to you and they're acting holier than thou and acting as if they're better than you. I automatically start to think that something is going on. It's just like when the government says to you, everything's fine here, everything's all right, we're from the government, we're here to help, then you know for a fact it's time to panic. Lately, John has been in the news for other reasons, namely because of his troubling connections to Jeffrey Epstein, the so-called financier, pedophile, who reportedly hanged himself earlier this month while facing federal charges of sex trafficking. Epstein participated in the Edge Foundation's annual questions and attended its billionaires' dinners. Brockman may also be the reason why so many prominent academics, from Steven Pinker to Daniel Dennett, have found themselves answering awkward questions about their associations with Epstein. Now, the way Ghislaine Maxwell acted for the world of the socialite, for the upper crest so-called polite society with Jeffrey Epstein as a conduit, that is the same exact way John Brockman acted as a conduit for Epstein into the world of intellectuals and scientists. Now, I'm not saying that John Brockman had the same sort of role as Ghislaine Maxwell, okay? Nothing like that. But he was the introduction man, right? He was the man that introduced Epstein to these scientists, who vouched for Epstein with these scientists, brought them all together at the Edge Foundation, took a bunch of money from Jeffrey Epstein, right? So Brockman was the pivot man for Epstein when it came to procuring scientists, the same way Ghislaine Maxwell was the woman when it came to procuring young girls for him to abuse. They are clients of Brockman's. Marvin Minsky, the prominent MIT scientist who surfaced as one of Epstein's island buddies, a client of Brockman's, and we know that Virginia said that Marvin Minsky was not only an enabler, but that she was trafficked to him as well. And I talked about Minsky on an episode yesterday morning, I believe, or the day before. I don't know. All the days are blending together to me right now. But Minsky is definitely somebody that flew under the radar for way too long, and he passed away recently, so obviously he's not somebody whose name is in the forefront, but I don't think that his legacy should go down without that being part of it, right? What he did to Virginia, that needs to be talked about, that needs to be known. And, the media never really talks about Minsky, they never have. And of course, there's there's juicier people involved in the case for them, of course, because hell, nobody even knows who Minsky is unless you're involved in, science and stuff. But the fact of the matter is, Minsky needs more scrutiny, and he needs to be looked at harder by the legacy media. Joy Ito, the director of the elite research facility, MIT Media Lab, who has recently acknowledged extensive ties to Epstein, also a client of Brockman's. You see the pattern here, folks? You see how it works? All of these people, Brockman would be the center guy, right? The pivot. Epstein would come to him. Brockman would make the introduction. Epstein would suck them into his orbit. And we all know the story after that. Should we just write it off as natural collateral damage for someone with a network as extensive as Brockman's? He is, after all, a networker's networker. Yeah, sorry, negative. One thing we've learned in this case, the coincidences aren't just coincidences in this case. There's always more to it. There's always more underneath the surface. When you do just a little scratch of the surface, you always find a little bit more. Based on my observations over the last decade, his whole operation runs on two simple but powerful principles. First, the total value of the network, and thus his own value, goes up if the nodes start connecting to each other independently of him. Yeah, well, that's how networking usually works, right? You make the introduction, you water the seeds, then you let the garden grow. And Brockman was very good at that. Very good at that. Nurturing relationships between people like Epstein with money and scientists who needed that money to get their projects off the ground. Second, the more diverse the network, the more attractive to its newcomers as well as to all the existing members. Billionaires are rich, but they might harbor an insecurity complex related to not being very well read. Looking at you, Bill Gates. Ooh, zinger at Bill Gates, our friend Bill Gates. Scientists, in contrast, are usually well-read, but might aspire to fancier cars and luxuries and funding for their pet projects and so on. There's something for everyone, and in the case of Epstein, someone seems to have done the matchmaking. Yeah, of course, it's obvious. We know that was happening, right? And people who follow the story have heard of John Brockman, and people know that he's a big-time literary agent and somebody who is, very connected when it comes to scientists, et cetera, But it's obvious when you really dig deep and you take a look at what was going on that Brockman was working as, the doorway into the scientific world, the man that would match these people together like he was the millionaire matchmaker, right? Oh, Epstein has money, this guy has a pet project Epstein might like, let's get them together. And then, of course, I'm sure Brockman was getting a percent somewhere down the line. Obviously, I don't have evidence to prove that, but it works well with our whole entire thread of money laundering, right? We all know that if you were to match up all of the receipts on the cash transactions, et cetera, how many of them were reported to the IRS? I'd really like to know that. In Brockman's world, billionaires, scientists, artists, novelists, journalists, and musicians all blend together to produce enormous value for each other and, of course, for Brockman. Again, a symbiotic relationship. There's nothing wrong with that for a literary agent to, bring people together to try and network, to help his clients get funding, et cetera. The problem is when you're using Jeffrey Epstein as that linchpin, when you're using Jeffrey Epstein as the draw. Brockman's a smart guy, all right? And did anyone thinks that Brockman didn't have an idea what Epstein was up to? I'm sorry, but I don't believe that. This mingling of clients doesn't happen in other literary agencies, at least not to this extent. Nor does this happen at Brockman Incorporated, as all such interactions that we know of took place under the umbrella of the Edge Foundation, a sibling organization with Brockman as its president. Of course, you don't want to shit where you eat, right? You don't want to put it under the banner of your literary agency, so you start this thing called the Edge Foundation. Perfect. We'll get this Edge Foundation together, and we'll bring together all of these scientists with their fantastic benefactor, Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, did I mention there's a bunch of young girls on the island, too? Would Brockman Incorporated exist without the Edge Foundation? Possibly, and it did at the outset. Would it be as powerful, trading on Brockman's ability to rub shoulders with academics and billionaires alike? Probably not. Still, I can attest that Brockman's authors faced no pressure to get involved with Edge. I, for example, diligently responded to their annual questions between 2010 and 2013, and then stopped, as I was put off by Brockman's insistence that people responding to the annual questions should keep away from politics. Look, this guy, John Brockman, was as much of an enabler as anybody else, right? This guy, John Brockman, is very powerful in the industry that he is in. And he is definitely a gatekeeper to Epstein, right? Definitely was a gatekeeper to Epstein, and definitely held the keys to a lot of these scientists and authors moving their projects forward on the back of Epstein's dime. And the fact that they told their authors to stay away from politics and stuff when it comes to responding to the questions, well, that doesn't shock anybody, right? They don't want them, their overlords in one of the alphabet soup agencies that were running Epstein to get upset with the commentary. When the Epstein-Brockman connection first surfaced in the news, I wanted to give Brockman the benefit of the doubt. It's possible, I thought, that Epstein was just one of the many rich people in Brockman's orbit. Or maybe the two had been close only before Epstein's first criminal case in the mid-2000s. Or maybe Brockman was in the dark about Epstein's tendencies and they only talked about quantum physics and artificial intelligence. Yeah, look, I can understand why the author would feel that way about Brockman. He's his agent. He wants to think the best of the guy. Of course, you always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? You don't want to go into things and be like, all right, this dude's a part of Epstein's operation. That's it. Nothing can change my mind. Of course not. You always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. You want to look at the evidence and you want to make sure that your line of thinking is clear and that it has nothing to do with a confirmation bias or anything like that, right? So this gentleman, the author, Morozov, who wrote this article, wanted to give Brockman the benefit of the doubt, but obviously it doesn't add up, right? When the pieces start to come into play, you can't try and, bend the truth to make it fit what you think the situation should be. You just have to follow the truth wherever it goes. In the last few weeks, such a charitable interpretation has become very hard to sustain, especially as other details implicating Marvin Minsky and Joy Ito, who has apologized for taking money from Epstein, became public. John Brockman has not said a word publicly about his connection to Epstein since the latest scandal broke, preferring to maintain silence on the matter. That I have found quite infuriating. Yeah, it is pretty infuriating, right? A guy like Brockman should have came out right away, distanced himself from Epstein, distanced himself from the whole entire situation, and answered questions about his relationship with Epstein and as his role as a gatekeeper. But instead, like the rest of them, he just clammed up, quieted down, and hoped it would go away. And that's what they all hope. Because of the first time around, how things went. They hope that this time around it's the same thing. That nothing... the wheels don't turn, nobody gets in trouble, and justice is never served. Well, I'm here to tell them this isn't the last time around, all right? It's a whole new world we're living in, folks. There was no social media like this the last time around. There was no way for the survivors to go directly to the people with their case and their story. Now there is. And guess what? We've completely bypassed all of their buddies in the legacy media. We've completely bypassed all of their friends like George Stephanopoulos and Amy Robach, okay? We're taking the case directly to the people this time, and it terrifies them. It scares them. They know that there is no place for them to run. There is no safe haven for these people at this point. Knowing that Brockman likes to brag about all the famous people he has met and befriended, you can easily count the seconds until he name-checks Marshall McLuhan or Andy Warhol or Gregory Bateson in a casual conversation. I decided to look over our correspondence over the past decade and see if he might have name-dropped Epstein somewhere. And of course, he did. Browsing through our email correspondence, I stumbled upon a most peculiar email from September 12th of 2013. It was very laconic, JEFYI-JB, followed by my short bio and some media clippings. You can check the entire PDF of the correspondence here. There's a hyperlink in this story. Make sure you click on the link in the description box after the article, and you can check out that PDF. Strangely, it was sent to me and had no other contacts in CC. Perhaps he wanted to send it to JE, but put my email there by mistake. When I commented on the meaning of this cryptic message, he responded with the following message reproduced here in full. I missed that one. Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire science philanthropist, pedophile, showed up at his weekend's event by helicopter with his beautiful young assistant from Belarus. He'll be in Cambridge in a couple of weeks. Asked me who he should meet. You were one of the people I suggested and told him I would send some links. He's the guy who gave Harvard $30 million to set up Martin Nowak. He's been extremely generous in funding projects of many of our friends and clients. He also got into trouble and spent a year in jail. That's what he says. Just he got in trouble and spent a year in jail. That's what Brockman says in the email. Doesn't go into detail, no context, nothing. Right? Why are you providing cover for him, Mr. Brockman? Why don't you let your other people know, the people that you're representing, the sort of scoundrel, the sort of snake that you're trying to get them in bed with? If he contacts you, it's probably worth your time to meet him, as he is extremely bright and interesting. Really what he means is extremely rich. Last time I visited his house, the largest private residence in NYC, I walked in to find him in a sweatsuit and a British guy in a suit with suspenders getting foot massages from a young, well-dressed Russian woman. After grilling me for a while about cybersecurity, the Brit named Andy was commenting on the Swedish authorities and the charges against Julian Assange. Andy meaning Prince Andrew, aka the Prince of Punk Asses, the Prince of Lies. We think they're liberal in Sweden, but it's more like northern England as opposed to southern Europe, he said. In Monaco, Albert works 12 hours a day, but at 9 p.m. when he goes out, he does whatever he wants and nobody cares. But if I do it, I'm in big trouble. At that point, I realized that the recipient of Irina's foot massage was His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Indeed, a week later, on a slow news day, the cover of the New York Post had a full-page photo of Jeffrey and Andrew walking in Central Park under the headline, "The Prince and the Perv." That was the end of Andrew's role as the UK trade ambassador. To which I responded, "Thanks for clarifying this. I'm sure he's an all-around sweet guy, but I'll have to think about it. It could be that I spent far too much time in the Soros bubble, but I have zero interest in meeting billionaires. If I did, I'd be going to Davos every year, but I appreciate you taking the time." That's interesting that he brings up George Soros here, and that he was in George Soros's bubble and wants nothing to do with that either. I mean, George Soros is another one of these billionaire investors that we could probably do a whole entire podcast on, right? Because all of these guys, doesn't matter your political bend, folks, okay? All of these big players, all of these big-time bundlers and money guys, package guys, these guys are all bad for business, all right? These guys are the worst kind of lobbyists. Here is Brockman again. A billionaire who owns Victoria's Secret plus a modeling agency is a different kind of animal. But I hear you and basically agree. Gregory Bateson once advised me that, of all of our human inventions, economic man is by far the dullest. JB. And here's my final answer. A billionaire who owns Victoria's Secret plus a modeling agency. One more reason to stay away, actually. And look, the author of this article seems like a savant at this point, right? For avoiding all of this, staying out of the clutches of Epstein, not falling into the trap. So he definitely needs to get some props, right? Evgeny Morozov needs to get some props for not falling into that trap. I didn't know who Epstein was at the time. Since I've never been keen to hang out with billionaires, mine was a natural response. I declined Brockman's invitations to hang out on his farm or attend his famous billionaire dinners. So I didn't think much of that invitation and eventually forgot about it. Needless to say, I never heard from Epstein or from Brockman about Epstein. Of course, they try and dangle the carrot, right? But if you're not willing to play ball, they don't want anything to do with you. They don't want any loose lips on their ship, right? They know what happens with loose lips. So they don't want any of that nonsense. If you're not down with their proclivities, if you're not a fellow traveler, you're not welcome. In that old email, it seemed clear that Brockman was acting as Epstein's PR man, his liaison with the world of scientists and intellectuals that Brockman had cultivated. Just like I said, Brockman was the pivot player here. He was the door, the revolving door that swung and opened the whole entire world of academia to Jeffrey Epstein and gave him the credibility for these scientists to listen to what he has to say. That Brockman has said nothing over this affair is rather bewildering. He did not return requests for comment left on his email and voicemail. I do know that John Brockman has been in poor health over the last few years, so I've cut him some slack. But patient as I am, the time has run out. It's not as if the Epstein story broke yesterday. It's been more than a month since Epstein was arrested on the latest charges. Still, no word on the issue. And now that I've found that old email he sent me, I cannot believe that he knew absolutely nothing of Epstein's wild sexual escapades. In fact, his email suggests he was trying to capitalize on them to recruit yet another useful idiot into Epstein's network. 100%. 100%. That's what these guys did. This network was vast, folks. So much larger than we could have ever imagined, or that's even been presented to us. I feel like getting a punch board and setting it up like they did in The Wire to take down Barksdale and Stringer Bell. That's how I feel right about now. Is in my office. I'm about to set one up with pictures and really start digging into this, like I'm a Detective McNulty over here, because this is the many layers of this, the many chambers of this. It's so vast. It is so vast that it's hard to wrap your mind around how many top level important people were involved in not only the actual abuse, but enabling this to go on for so many years. There's more. A close analysis of Edge Foundation, publicly available financial statements suggest that between 2001 and 2015, it has received $638,000 from Epstein's various foundations. In many of those years, Epstein was Edge's sole donor. Yet, how many of Edge's contributors, let alone readers, knew Epstein played so large a role in the organization? And now remember, those are just the numbers that we have on the books. We don't really know how much money was given to any of these people, any of these foundations. We know that Epstein loved to spread the money around, but was it always, done on the up and up? Straight transfers of money, or how many bags of cash were given out? That's a question that needs to be asked, because the money aspect of this whole entire thing has been left to the side when I believe it's a big part of it. A big tool for law enforcement to use to leverage these people. I wish they would use it more often. I'm just one of the many authors in Brockman's agency. My departure wouldn't affect anything. I am also the last one to complain. His agency sold 2 of my books, and I have 2 more underway, also sold by them. Yet, I am ready to pull the plug on my association with Brockman's agency and would encourage other authors to consider doing the same until and unless he clarifies the relationship between him, the Edge Foundation, and Epstein. If such an explanation is not forthcoming, many of us will have to decide whether we would like to be part of this odd intellectual club located on the dubious continuum between the seminar room and the sex trafficking ring. That's some powerful stuff, right? And I commend him for doing that and calling on his colleagues to do the same. Nobody should be working with this Brockman guy until he clarifies what's going on, right? Sorry, buddy, time to split. Excessive networking, it appears, devours its own. Brockman is already many months too late to what he should have done much earlier. Close down the Edge Foundation, publicly repent, retire, and turn Brockman Incorporated into yet another banal literary agency, the kind where authors do not have to mingle with billionaires at fancy dinners or worry about walking in on the Prince of Punk asses getting his feet massaged. The Unnetwork. I think that's a great idea, right? I really do. I think that the role that Brockman played in this can't be understated. I think that it deserves more scrutiny, and I think the Edge Foundation in general should be put on blast. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Edge Foundation in the coming days. We'll talk a little bit more about that, add some context to just exactly what it is, what they were up to, what sort of conferences they were doing, who was involved, etc., etc. So folks, look, like I said, the rabbit hole is deep. This rabbit hole is so deep. Every time we take a dive into the hole, we find more chambers and more warrens. So we just have to keep pulling on these threads. We have to keep going, pulling on these threads, and calling out all of these enablers whenever possible, because they played a big role in this, right? Without this man, John Brockman, Epstein would have had a harder time getting into the world of academia. He would have had a harder time getting his fingers deep into this world. But yet Brockman acted as that pivot, he acted as the conduit, and Epstein, in turn, was accepted by some of the finest minds in the world, who we've realized, while they might be very smart individuals, were disgusting scoundrels, just like Jeffrey Epstein. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, I will be back later on tonight for the Daily Drop.